Hi, I'm Jonathan Fields, and this is Good Life Project. So my guest today is Wokie Nwabueze, and she is a women's communication strategist, and we're really going to kind of break down exactly what that means, but also track back, because she's got a pretty interesting journey that I think is common with a lot of people, and will really illuminate some interesting challenges and how she's moved through them. So awesome hanging out with you today.
And you too, Jonathan. I'm very happy to be here.
So I'm kind of fascinated by what you do right now, but what I'm even more fascinated is by the journey that's brought you to what you do right now. And you and I share a bit of we have a bit of a past in common with a stint in the law.
Yes.
So take me back to sort of your exploration of the role of communication, and especially as it pertains to, I guess, the way that women relate to the world.
Yeah. Well, my background, I can just tell you a little bit about my history. So I'm a first-generation kid. My parents are West African. I grew up in New York, in Queens.
How old were you when...
they came here to have me. My older brother was born in Liberia.
Okay.
So I'm the first in my family born in this country. So we lived in Queens in a really amazing community where the United Nations actually housed many of the people affiliated with it. So it was incredibly diverse. I mean, our neighbors were from India, Venezuela, Israel, Nigeria. And so I grew up around a lot of diversity.
Yeah.
And what that meant is that the issue of race or ethnic identity or religion really wasn't something I thought about, because there was so much of everything, it didn't matter. Right. But for me, gender was always something that, caused a lot of question in my mind, even as a girl. Because I grew up in New York City, right, living in the United States, but I grew up in a very African family. I have brothers. And so for me, there was always this push and pull between what it meant to be a girl. I watched the women in my family have, diverse roles, but there was always something about men and women that was very distinct, not only in Nigerian and Liberian culture, but in the other families that I saw around me. So as a girl, I know that you're an introvert. I'm actually very extroverted, but I was very shy as a kid. And that shyness came from always wondering where I fit in, right? How am I supposed to show up in the world? How gregarious should I be? How smart should I be? I always questioned that even as a child. The other piece of my shyness, I think, was also very culturally driven, because my parents made immense sacrifices in their life to give us the life that we had. They are definitely pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of people. They didn't complain. They worked hard. They sacrificed, and they were extremely humble and respectful and deferential people. And that's how I was raised to be. So I have this, question about where do girls show up, and these role models that I really respect, who are very humble and quiet and respectful and make sacrifice. Yeah. And so for me, I think my communication challenges as a child started by trying to absorb and interpret all of those messages. And I believed, at least then, that I was supposed to be quiet. And I was supposed to be respectful, and I wasn't supposed to complain or be outrageous or be demanding.
Because that's just what you had seen around
That's what
the
I'd
house.
seen.
That was right.
The people that I respected the most carried themselves in that way. And so for me, that's what I believe.
So I'm curious. When you see that as a child, and you see that, okay, this is the way that you behave in the world, and this is the way that they're teaching me to behave, were you aware of the way that people sort of outside of the family responded to that, or either responded in a good way by saying, what wonderful people, they're so courteous and respectful, or the flip side, which is, well, these are people that I can walk on. These are people I can take advantage of.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw both. I saw both. My family, my parents are very respected in our families. My parents were the people that everyone leaned on, right? So they were strong. They came here, they established, this home in Queens. And so when people wanted to come to this country for their education, they came to my parents. When people needed things, they came to my parents. And so for me, they were heroes because they were so strong and they didn't complain. And that's what I was absorbing. But on the other hand, I just saw things happening around us that, sometimes I felt like they should scream, they should say something, and they didn't. There's a story that I have. I was actually just thinking about this morning. My little brother, I think he was about 5. He was getting his first bike. And I was 8. We're 3 years apart. And I remember going to the bike store, and they brought out a floor model for my brother. And I remember noticing it had scratches on it. And my father talked to the store owner. He negotiated. He was supposed to get a brand new bike. And we went back a few days later, and the guy brought out this shiny bike, and I noticed it was the same bike because I saw the scratches. And I told my father, and he didn't get upset. He just told, he told the man that he noticed that he was trying to lie to my dad, and my father said to him, you're a bad man. And we walked out of the store quietly. And I was like, what? Like, I thought there would be this, confrontation. And what I saw was this calm stoicism in my father all the time. And so the message again was, even when someone does something wrong, you stay calm, you stay quiet. As an adult, I understand that there's a difference between being centered in your power and being walked all over.
And there's
but
also
as a child.
Yeah, and there's a difference. I'm sorry,
No.
I want to let you express yourself fully.
Very
but
expressive.
use the word calm and use the word quiet, and to me, those are very different things.
Exactly.
You can be calm and powerful.
Right.
But not be quiet.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly what I realized as an adult, that there is a difference. But as a child, I interpreted it as quiet. Like, you should be quiet.
Nah.
You should absorb, you should be strong, you should sacrifice, and don't say anything about it. And so I was very shy as a child. And, it's interesting. I went to a women's college. So I think it wasn't until high school that I was suddenly in this environment full of women where suddenly gender wasn't the same pressure that it had been earlier in my life. And it was that time in my life when I really started to become more expressive and to explore my own, my own gifts and feel really proud of expressing them. And it was through academics for me at that point.
Right. I mean, was there sort of any moment of awakening, or was it a gradual process for you where you just started to say, okay, it's time?
I think it was a gradual process. It's interesting. I did a lot of theater in college. And so that was definitely like, baptism by fire, right? Like a shy person getting up on stage. And so that was very helpful. But I think it was really that process of being in college, those formative years, that helped me begin to see that, I have something to say, and gender means something different than I thought it did as a child. And so I started exploring womanhood, I think, at that point.
Did your brother, have you had conversations around this topic with your brother? Sure,
yeah.
And what was his experience coming off? Sort of like, how did it contrast with yours in terms of those observations?
I think it's the same. I think both I have two brothers. Both of them are very, respectful of people, but they're musicians. And so they have found a different form of expression, I think, than I have. My form of expression is words. That's what I do. For them, it's music and it's art. But I think we're all the same in that way. So I think we had similar experiences, but they weren't grappling with the gender issue, obviously. So I think it's, that's the difference.
Yeah. So where do you take your exploration? Once you start to realize, okay, there's something going on here, and there's something that I need to dive deeper into.
Yeah. I didn't consciously take it anywhere, but as the universe would have it, my first job out of college was working for an organization where I was helping people resolve conflicts through communication. So my role was to go into communities and talk to people about the power of communication. And that's when I started studying communication as a technique more than a personal evolution. And I started seeing how other people struggle with it, right? So for me, it was a gender issue. For some people, it's, a violence issue. Sometimes there are psychological issues. There's community, race, all kinds of elements that play into it. And so that was my work. And doing this work, my very first presentation or workshop in front of a group, and this is like a true story, which I can't believe is a true story, but a friend of mine who was a colleague at the time, we had to do a workshop in front of a group of prisoners at Rikers Island. And they were told, no commissary today, you're going to go to a workshop about conflict resolution. Because in this organization, we work with correctional facilities. We did a lot of that type of work. And so I had to get in front of this group, and I had to, meet them where they were and not worry about what they thought about me.
By the way, for those who aren't sort of like in the area, Rikers is?
It's a prison.
Right.
It's a prison. And, that for me was a huge learning experience, because I realized that no matter who you are, this issue of communicating presents a challenge, number one, when there's emotion involved, and that we all struggle to not necessarily express ourselves, but to have our message land, you know, where it should. And so for me, that was a fantastic, you know, again, another baptism by fire.
Right. So what's that like, though? You walk into a room full of how many prisoners?
It's about 25 prisoners.
And it's all, Rikers is all male, isn't it?
Well, it's not, I don't believe it's all male, but that was a male group.
Okay.
Yeah, and so these gentlemen were in a development program, and so they were doing quite a bit of training and development before they were released from prison.
Right. And were they open to what you were there to talk about?
Not at first, because I didn't want to be there, right? And who wants to talk about conflict resolution when you're in jail, right? But what we did was we helped them explore for themselves where communication came up for them and where conflict came up. And so if you're in a gang, those are relationships, right? You've got to get along. You've got to talk about things. Some of them talked about their wives coming to visit and the tension and the struggle because of their situation and where communication comes up for them. And so, you know, for everybody, I mean, this issue of communicating, it's relevant. I mean, communication shapes everything that we do.
So, I mean, that had to be an interesting experience on so many levels. What do you take away from something like that, though, when you walk into that and you leave? I mean, I love experiences like that because you go in with a certain set of expectations.
Right.
And almost invariably you walk out and you say, okay, I completely didn't expect this. And there's almost always like this, there's some big thing that you take away saying, huh.
Yeah.
I mean, for you, was there any sort of like real shift in that experience?
For me, the shift was, it helped me immediately get over what people thought about me because I was thinking so much about, oh, they don't want to be here. I mean, once I just dove in and said, I have a message that's important, but I'm not going to shove it down your throat, right? I'm going to deliver it in a way that's important to you.
Right.
And I just did it. For me, I realized that, you know, I had the ability and the confidence to communicate in any situation, right? And the other is that when you are communicating with someone, I think one of the most important things is to meet them where they were. So we had this shiny agenda, you know, we're going to talk about these 5 topics, but this group wasn't interested. And so I think when most people think about communication and they think they're effective communicators, they say things like, I'm not afraid to speak my mind, or I get things off my chest. But the reality is that effective communicators speak in a way that lands with the recipient. And so that was what we had to do in the moment.
Wait, say that again.
When you're communicating effectively is speaking in a way that actually lands with the recipient.
Yeah. So, which is so backwards from the way that so many people do it, which is I have something that I need to transmit.
Right.
Rather than saying, okay, how can I kind of like take in the needs of the individual or the room,
right,
and operate like based on that need first and foremost.
Exactly. I mean, if you analogize it to say a plane ride, right? When you get in the plane, you buckle in, you get your safety, you know, education, and the plane takes off. I mean, those are the words leaving your mouth, right? But you don't clap until you're safely on the runway where you've landed.
Why do people always do that, by the way? Like, sweet, another one down.
Well, because you survived, right? And so think of communication that way. When the words land in a way that the other person receives and understands what you're trying to say, then you've communicated effectively. Yeah. And as you said, to do that, you have to understand the other person and work with that.
So this is a pretty powerful moment for you, and you walk away with, it sounds like some really new understandings about letting go of expectations to a certain, and just reacting to what happens within the context of a conversation. But this is still kind of early in your journey.
It is very early.
So let's kind of like move through it a little bit more.
Yeah, so I worked with this organization for about 3 years full time, and then I went to law school, and that's where our stories are very similar. And you know, I wasn't really sure why I went to law school. I knew that I wanted the education. I knew that I wanted to explore that. And fortunately for me, in law school, my mentor was the head of the mediation clinic at my at the school that I went to. And so I did quite a lot of dispute resolution work in the legal sector in law school. And I was a teaching assistant and spent most of my time doing ADR work. But when I graduated, I went into a firm. And before my firm time started, I had a fellowship as a domestic violence litigator. Mm-hmm. So, it was kind of these weird twists and turns that I took as an attorney, but again, a very important education for me. In the time that I litigated domestic violence matters, my clients were all my age. Mm-hmm. And these were women who I saw compromising in the most tragic ways, their safety, their happiness, their children's safety. And for me, the learning was that when there is trauma, right, there's a different way to communicate. But also, the issue of women came up for me again, because I saw so many similarities in the way they thought. I mean, the outcome for them was very different, but the way they thought, right? Be stoic, be sacrificial.
So it's like it's taking you back to your whole upbringing.
It's taking me back. Yeah. And I'm realizing that there are all these parallels in belief, even if your life manifests those issues differently. These women happened to be in relationships where they had no voice. And what I realized that was very sad to realize is that they didn't think they had a right to have a voice at all. And so that was a year of my legal career, which only spanned 4 years of time. So it was a huge legal career. But I tucked that away in my mind. And I noticed, and again, I became very interested in watching women around this issue of communication. Because there's something in our socialization, I think it happens very early in life, where we begin to recede and unlearn how to communicate. I mean, you and I, we have daughters. I have 2 daughters. Right. I know you have a daughter. I'm quite sure my children are confident communicators right now at 4 and 2 years old, right? They have clear boundaries. They say no when they mean no. They ask for what they want. But something happens to girls where we begin, again, to unlearn what we're born with.
So what? Like, what is it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a study that that was done at NYU that's very frightening. That determined that for most female children, self-esteem rises to age 9, and then plummets. And some of the reasons are that before age 9, our sense of self-esteem is internal, right? It's who we are, what we're good at, what we believe. And after age 9, it becomes external. So it becomes what other people think of us.
So you become more socially aware.
More socially aware, exactly. Right. Now, if you think about energy, right, and the 5th chakra, which is the throat chakra, communication and creativity also begin to develop at that same age group. So at this time when for girls self-esteem is plummeting, it's the time where creativity and communication should be developing. And if we just think about the media. What do girls hear about themselves, right? You're supposed to be a princess and beautiful, and that's when puberty is happening. So I think there's so many reasons that girls just begin to believe that they can't show up the same way that a boy does, And even looking back at my life, I think about that time. I mean, that was the first summer where, I thought about, boys and what do they think about me? And, and for girls, it depends. I mean, you could be, not the ideal, right, of what beauty is. Maybe you don't look like Barbie, and that affects your self-esteem. Or maybe your parents begin to treat you differently because you're entering puberty and they're uncomfortable with your development. Or maybe it's cultural, like it was for me, where girls just have a different role.
So it's probably just a whole bunch of different things kind of conspiring simultaneously. I mean, I don't know if you know this information, but I wonder if there are different cultures around the world where women from around that same age, where the dynamic is reversed. I'd be really curious if this existed anywhere, where the men are sort of more subdued and sort of more inward, and the women rise to become sort of like the more outward, more dominant, more like the stronger voice,
right.
Because of a combination of immediate surroundings, culture, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I don't know, but that would be very interesting to look into, and maybe I will, actually.
I know, I want to go Google that. So you start to really explore this also, and you're working as a lawyer now. But spending a lot of your time on the mediation side of things.
Right. Well, actually, when I practiced, I was at a corporate law firm on Wall Street. So I was doing a lot of transactional work, employment work. securities law.
Right. And at that time, were you mom yet, or?
I wasn't. This is still my late 20s, early 30s. So,
got it.
Yeah, no, I wasn't a mom yet. And so I stayed in law for a few years, and then I made a really fantastic transition into a corporate environment doing dispute resolution work. So now I'm working with people in the employment space around communication and seeing completely different, issues come up, but for women, the same. This sense of fairness and should I ask for this? A lot of women talk about feeling like, they were underpaid or undervalued. And, a simple question is, did you ask for the raise, for the promotion? And the answer was usually no. And so in that context, here the issue is again, right? Work hard, be valuable, but don't ask to be valued. Because again, women felt like they had to play a secondary position and didn't have the voice to ask for what they wanted and what they deserved. Yeah.
So when was it that? I guess the bigger question is: do you think between then and now, you've seen any meaningful change in that? Or do you think it's pretty much the same thing?
For myself, or in the
just
world?
In general, for women in the workplace? Because it's a huge conversation that's going on now, and it seems like it's been going on for a while. But I can't get a beat on whether people are saying it's really different.
I don't know that it's different in the workplace. I think I'm seeing some shifts in the entrepreneurial space, though, because if you have a business, right, and a lot of the entrepreneurs that I know and that I work with are passion-based, entrepreneurs, and you have a message, right, and so this issue is part of their survival. You can no longer be, quiet and not ask for what you want, or not ask for the sale, not express your message, not pitch yourself. And so I think it's becoming a more important issue, but I still see similar struggles, even for entrepreneurial women, for sure.
Which is interesting, because I think the last stats that I saw show that, the percentage of women entrepreneurship is exploding.
Yeah.
And there's a very large number of women, at least in the United States, of female entrepreneurs. And so you wonder if that has to do with that being sort of a self-selecting thing, where women who feel more innately, organically drawn or oriented towards having a stronger voice and expressing their needs are more comfortable moving into entrepreneurship, or whether they move into it and then say, okay, this isn't going to work unless I actually step up and actually start having a strong voice. Because as an entrepreneur, you have got to go out and claim what you want and what you need. On a daily basis, or else it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I would say the latter. I think that, for women, many women don't want to be in the workplace, because once you have children, it becomes very challenging to manage that, that reality, that work-life balance, myth, frankly. And so, that's definitely one issue. I think that, people are seeing other women role models step up into this space and realize that they have something to say. But once they get there, the biggest struggles that I see are sales conversations and pitching, being interviewed, feeling confident enough to be an expert and claim your expertise. Those are the things that I think that come up. And as you said, it's inevitable that you've got to deal with that.
So let's break those down a little bit. So sales conversations, what are the big things?
The big issues around sales. Well, first of all, there's the technique, and even thinking back to some of the stories that I shared with you, you've got to understand what the other person wants, right? You've got to listen really well. You have to be able to translate that to be of service to someone else and to sell yourself, right? And so to sell yourself, you have to understand your value, right? You've got to communicate with people comfortably, listen well, and then you have to ask for the sale. You've got to say, I'd like to work with you. Yes or no, right? You've got to ask. You've got to put that out there. So that's certainly a sales challenge if you're not comfortable communicating or don't know your value or what you offer or what other people need. All of those things stem from communication.
Right. So from the sales standpoint, it definitely is really important to be empowered. Is that different? Is that a different dynamic in the sales sort of side of things between men and women, though? Have you seen? I mean, are men more inclined to take that third step and say, give me your money, than women? Or is it just sort of like a sale, like everybody is terrified of doing that?
I think many people are afraid of sales, but I find that women are more afraid of sales because they don't appreciate their own value. Right? If I offer a service, if you really are struggling with this issue of communication, and I know that I can help you because this is my expertise, this is my passion, I have to be comfortable to say that to you and say, I can help you because I'm really good at this. This is what I charge. And I find that women are afraid to say that I'm good at this. This is what I cost, right? And will you pay me money for it?
No.
So I think it comes back to that issue of confidence and value for women, more so than men.
Yeah, I mean, and what's interesting too is, at least in my experience, I feel like women tend to be, very often, again, a big generalization here about women and men, but just based on my experience, I would say that the women that I've interacted with tend to be more socially aware, more socially attuned to, a dynamic than men. I think they're just they tend to be paying attention more. Yeah. Maybe they're better at reading sort of body language and signals. And than the men that I know, who tend to kind of barrel in more and just like, I've got something I have to get out.
Right.
And so to me, it seems like when you look at the fundamental skill set that women might come into a sales-oriented conversation with, and again, gross generalization, and this is certainly going to vary between person, but it seems like that, a dynamic where you're more socially aware is going to be something that helps you. But then I guess the flip side is you're probably better able to understand the needs of somebody, but you're probably also more concerned of their perception of you at the same time. Exactly. So it's like this double-edged thing.
Exactly. But I think that's exactly right. Because I think if you are a person, and it's not just women, but if you are intuitive, if you're sensitive, if you're a great listener, if you're socially attuned, you have exactly what it takes to communicate. Because again, communication is about landing with the other person. So if I know that you are in pain over a particular issue, and I can identify what you need, and I can turn that around and offer you the solution for that, right? Or I can acknowledge it in a way that makes you feel heard, then that's great communication, right? That's effective. Because once I acknowledge your pain or your feelings or your needs, you will feel as though I understand you, right? That I care about you. Right. And you will be more likely to listen to me. And so whether it's a one-way conversation or a two-way conversation, it's getting underneath, the words, to the interest, to the emotions, that makes communication really work. And so I think women, and this is a generalization, but women are at an advantage, I think naturally, because many women are intuitive and do have a connection emotionally to the world around them. It's not just women, obviously, but it's taking a step beyond that knowledge and then having the courage and the confidence to then express, what you're picking up or use what you're picking up to communicate. I mean, that's what market research is, right? It's understanding the client, what makes them tick, what do they feel, what do they need, what will they respond to. If you just know that because of the person you are, you can use that to communicate with people in a way that they hear you.
Yeah. I wonder if almost, people sense that their ability, if you're a highly intuitive person, whether you're male or female, and you kind of know that about yourself, and that you know that you can get into people's heads fairly quickly because you actually care, because you're paying attention. And, I wonder if it's almost a weird thing where you almost feel manipulative if you then say, well, this is, this is how I can enter your life to help get you to a particular place. But if there's, if it's purely in service of the other person, there's no benefit for you besides the fact that you like to help them, you probably feel great. But if along the way there's some benefit for you too, I can see a lot of people saying, okay, this just doesn't feel right. Even though you're giving somebody else exactly what they need and you happen to be benefiting at the same time. So it's the optimal scenario. Right.
I think it goes to your intention, though. I mean, is your intention to harm the person? No. Because really, what is negotiation, right? It's the exchange of value. And so if I understand the value you need and I can offer you that in exchange for the value I need, what's wrong with that? I mean, one example where I did use this, this concept in a negotiation. I had a house painted. I lived in this beautiful house that was on the corner across the street from a school. And I got a bunch of quotes. One of the painters that came gave me a quote. It was a little higher than I wanted to pay. And I just talked to him. And he shared with me that he was, spinning off from one of the bigger companies, that he needed exposure for his business. That was what he was looking for, and referrals. And so I said to him, hey, you can keep your lawn sign here for as long as you want, because I'm on the corner. And people drop all the neighborhood families drop their kids off at school across the street. And in exchange, will you lower the price for me? And he said, sure. And all I did was listen to him and understand what was important to him and offer him something in exchange for what I needed, which was a lower price. And I don't think, that's a poor intention, even though I was kind of getting, essentially understanding him and getting under the surface. That's negotiating, I believe.
Yeah, which is interesting because if we take it all the way full circle back to your dad in the store with the bike.
Yeah.
That's the conversation that never happened.
Right.
So it's kind of funny to sort of like see how you've come, and it's like you're bringing back and saying, okay, this is how I need to behave differently in the world. This is how I need to help other people understand how to behave differently in the world. So at this point, what's driving that for you? For me,
I think what drives it for me is that I see the struggles so clearly in other people. I work with so many people that have something to express, that are in pain because they have not been able to have a conversation that they need to have. They haven't been able to ask for what they need to ask for in their life. And when I see people in that struggle, I almost see this, this ball of twine, and I know that if they just pulled right here, right, and moved past this block and, reframe something a certain way, that it could change their life. And so that's what I enjoy doing. I mean, I think it's no coincidence that I ended up with the job that I did, because I certainly wasn't looking to enter the field of communication, but it's something that I've felt a struggle with throughout my entire life. And so I'm just passionate about it. And I know what a difference it makes when somebody learns, how to communicate more effectively.
So how do you, so now you're a mom, you're married.
I'm a mom, yep.
How old are your kids?
4 and 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, girls among them, or?
Girls.
Both girls?
Yeah.
Okay. So now it's sort of like, okay, this new cycle is continuing. And I'm curious if you're open to it, about sort of the family dynamic between you building relationship and communication with your husband, between you sort of creating examples for your kids. Because it's one thing to take all these great concepts and ideas and teach other people and work with clients and do them in the professional world.
Right.
But like everybody who knows, when you try and bring these things and you layer, into your personal lives and your family lives and your kids and your family relationships, things can get more complicated. More quickly. I'm curious how this all unfolds in the context of your personal life and your family life.
It's interesting because when my first daughter was born, so I'd been in my career, right, doing this work, helping other people become great communicators. But when my daughter was born, I felt like I took a huge step back in my own expression, because I became, that mom who did way too much, who didn't rest enough, who didn't take care of herself, and who never asked for help. And so now I'm replaying the cycle again in my own life. And it wasn't until my second daughter, during my second pregnancy actually, I actually ended up on bed rest, and I was very sick and I had some complications that I had to sit and think and absorb and assess what was happening in my life. Because I'd literally run myself into the ground, right? Working and being everywhere, and, that mom, and staying up all night and not asking for help, and having really no boundaries about my own needs, my own self-care.
And that's not a unique story either. No. I mean, so many, especially people in the helping, and I would consider you're a professional and you work on a communication strategy. Fundamentally, you're a helping professional.
Right.
So many people in some part of the helping professions spend so much energy helping other people but they're personally, it's like our tanks end up going lower, lower, because we're putting everything out into the world. And then at some point you have this moment where you're like, oh wait, I can't serve on the level that I want to serve. A, when I'm no longer congruent in my personal life, and B, when I'm so out of whack that I don't have enough to give and be effectively out there doing it.
Right. And, there's nothing that brings that home more clearly than bed rest, right? When you have a 2-year-old.
Yeah, can't imagine that.
And, you know, I went from up here doing everything to I can't do anything. I just have to, you know, lay here. And that was very difficult for me because, you know, I had my cape on with the M on the back. Like, I'm mom, I'm a woman, I'm doing all of these things. And I realized that I didn't even have the language for asking for help in my own life, right? I'd been very independent and strong. And I saw a lot of what I saw in my parents in myself, right? I'm the person that everyone leans on, and I don't complain, and I sacrifice. But my body said something different. My body said, you know, enough is enough. You've got to develop the language and the awareness, again, of what you need and what you deserve. And so I had to do a lot of work to decide, like, what mother meant for me, right? Like, what kind of mother was I going to be, and what did that take in reality? So in order to be of service in the world and to be the mother to my daughter and my, you know, unborn daughter, I knew I needed to take a step back because I couldn't do it all. I couldn't do what I used to do. And so there were some really interesting conversations that came of that, where I had to say, you know, I need to step back in this way, and I need you to step forward in this way. And even in my, you know, in my relationship, we renegotiated just who we were and how we operated, because we just got into this pattern where, you know, I was a super mom. And so we took a step back and had, you know, some really beautiful and difficult and intimate conversations about parenting, about limitations, about expectations, and about how we would take care of each other. And one thing that was very interesting to me is I always, and even unconsciously, I looked at other families, other relationships, our friends with kids, and I looked at, you know, the dads and what they did and what their role was, and the mother, and there was this unconscious comparison that was happening. Yeah, I think we're always
making that. Yeah, we don't even realize it, like you said.
Yeah, yeah. And I realized, like, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Like, we've got to decide, you know, what are we going to do? What works for us? And one admission that I had to make was that I did like doing it all for my daughter. You know, I did like changing the diapers, and I liked getting up. But what I needed to support that was someone to take care of me, right? I needed everything else handled so that I could focus and put my energy there. And that worked for us. And so that was a huge shift, because even health-wise and physically, you know, who knows what would have happened, you know, had I not had that moment where I had to stop and reassess everything.
So, and I'm curious, how did the early conversations go? I mean, was it like, oh, this is great, you know, la-di-da, this is what you need, this is what I'm willing to give, great, let's just do it? Or
Right. They started with a lot of honesty, right? A lot of noticing. I remember one of the first conversations we had, I said to my husband, I said, you know, it doesn't seem like you're really kind of all over this newborn baby thing. You know, like he's, you know, the whole tender little curly baby, changing the diapers up all night. That wasn't necessarily his thing. And that's okay. That was my thing. And I thought we would get into this huge argument about it. And he said, you're right. Yeah, it's kind of scary. Like, it's not really, you know, he was more excited about, you know, our kids as they were older and thinking about playing soccer and, you know, running around with them. And so we had to admit that, because we were operating under these expectations.
Yeah. It's like what you're supposed to be.
Right. What you're supposed
like, this
to
is
be
what
doing.
you're supposed to, and you're supposed to want to do this. And yeah.
Right. And so it started with honesty. And with me saying, you know, I need someone to take care of me. I'd never said that before in my life. Like, I need food, you know, I need a little attention and back rub, for someone to commiserate with me once in a while. And so admitting that weakness, and which is a good weakness, right? And that need was huge. It was very freeing to not judge each other, but to just, you know, talk honestly and then make decisions from there.
And did that lay the framework, I'm curious at all, or the foundation for your husband to then start to say, well, as long as you're owning up to some stuff,
Right. I mean, yeah.
I mean, because, you know, it's almost, I think probably a lot of people just bury, you know, and it's almost like when one person opens a floodgate, you're like, oh, so this can get real.
Right. Right. And then you get real. You get real. And it's not until you're real that you can start figuring out what the solutions are, right? Because if you start picking solutions out of the air without really digging beneath the issues and understanding where everybody stands and what they feel, then, you know, your solutions are superficial.
And also picking solutions that are going to work for you and your life and your personalities,
Right.
and like rather than solutions that are sort of like, okay, this is how everybody else around us does it, and this is what our parents did, or this is what we're supposed to do or told to do, or what the books say we're supposed to do.
Right.
They're not us. And I think we get so wrapped up in the model solution.
Right.
When, you know, our lives don't match the model life that the solution was built on top of.
Right.
You know, and then when it doesn't work, we wonder why it's blowing up.
Right.
And it's because there's a huge disconnect.
Right. There's a disconnect and there's a lot of judgment.
Yeah.
There's a lot of judgment. Yeah. And if you sit with your partner or your children and you listen with real compassion, right, which means with no judgment to what they need, and you're willing to accept that and to figure out what to do from that point, I think that's when you can make shifts and changes. You know, and so many women that I talk to who are moms, who are struggling, right? They are resentful of their lives, of their husbands. It's because they are not having these honest conversations. They're judging themselves, they're judging their husbands, and vice versa. And if you enter a conversation full of judgment, right? If I had said, you don't like taking care of the baby, versus what are your thoughts around like small babies, right? It's a different conversation. One is more freeing and automatically more open versus defensive. And so again, to find the solutions that work for you, you've got to, you know, be compassionate, understand, you know, the other person so that your words land.
Yeah. And yeah, I think it starts at home.
Yeah.
We could use a lot more of that rippling out into every part of the world right now.
Yeah.
I'm curious also, I mean, your kids are really young still.
They are.
Do you feel that they notice the sort of the agreement or like the trickle down effects of the way that you guys coexist around each other?
I think they do. And although they're young, my 4-year-old daughter, for example, she is a communicator. She talks. She understands. She is extremely intuitive. I believe she's an empath. She notices emotions. She will say, you seem to feel this way today. Or she comes home and she reports how people treated each other. That's what she notices in the world. At 4.
Wow.
Even younger. And so, you know, I know that we have to be very aware, right, of the role model and the examples that we set for her and for my younger daughter as well. And so with my daughters, I try to explain why, right? I think why is an important question. Although the phrase, because I said so, has come out of my mouth, right? Every once in a while. I try to explain why before she even asks, before either of them ask. So no, you can't do that because this, right? Or I made this decision because this. Because I want them to understand that they, you know, that there is an explanation, that they deserve an explanation, right? At times. And I ask them to express themselves as much as they can. I think another thing that is very helpful is acknowledging feelings. So when your child is having a tantrum, you know, a lot of parents will say, stop having a tantrum, right? Or go sit in the corner. And again, you know, nobody's perfect. That's happened in my home too. But what we try to be mindful of is acknowledging their feelings. One, so that they feel seen, but also so that they are acknowledging their feelings. Because when you are trained to swallow and quiet your emotions, you lose touch with that. And the same questions that I had as a child will come up for them too, right? Do I have a right to feel this way? Should I say something about how I'm feeling? Where do I show up in the world? And so, you know, we just try to be mindful of them as people and to communicate with them as though they are, you know, they're not adults, but they're not, you know, these little things running around the house. They're human beings who have feelings and who are learning to express themselves.
Yeah, I love that. Which really brings the whole conversation full circle.
Yeah, right.
All the way back to you now, sort of like creating the next cycle of understanding and seeing and observing and then changing.
Right.
So that the next generation now moves into the world differently, which is awesome. So, I love that. So the name of this project is A Good Life Project.
Yeah.
And when I offer that phrase to you, to live a good life, what comes up?
A good life to me means to be aware of your life, aware of everything in it, of what's important, to be aware of your feelings, to be intentional about the way you live, and to be expressive. To be expressive. And to land, like the plane, right? For your expression to land.
And then applaud when you land.
Right,
Celebrate
exactly.
it. Celebrate it. I love
Exactly.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. So I'm Jonathan Fields. My guest today has been Wokie Nwabueze, signing off for Good Life Project.